Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a trauma-informed therapist, life coach and disruptor of wellness norms based in Brighton, UK. This isn't another nice-to-have wellness podcast. Instead, this podcast seeks to redefine what it means to be well in today's world. Here, we challenge the status quo, seek to reunite wellness with social justice and improve accessibility, diversity and inclusivity within wellness and beyond. As a listener, you are not here to passively consume. Instead, you are an ambassador for real, embodied, societal and systemic change in the world. As your host, I stand for radical self-inquiry and being able to have those confronting but necessary conversations so that we can remember our collective humanity at this time. We're here for the revolution and you've got a front row seat. Welcome, Amna. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Okay, obviously I came across you from you being in the film My Hijab, My Choice, which is an absolutely incredible documentary available on Al Jazeera English. I've watched it a number of times myself, but I do know that some time has elapsed since then. We're also going to be hearing quite a bit about your story that has happened since then. So I'd love for you just to introduce yourself in a way that feels right and appropriate and alive for you today.
Gosh, that is always a big question, especially when you do multiple things and it's hard to know which bits of you to bring to a space. But I guess it's whatever comes.
Yes.
In the moment. So my name is Amna. I live in Manchester. I have 2 young adult children who are absolutely amazing. And I'm a local councillor at Manchester City Council, independent at the moment. And I also 1/3 of the Three Hijabis, which is a campaigning and activist organisation, educational organisation, trying to sort out the intersections of misogyny, racism and Islamophobia in cultural and sporting spaces. And I work freelance at the moment, so I've worked predominantly over the last 20 years in the charity space, working on women's rights and children's rights. Within that, mostly around violence against women and girls is being my work. And my particular specialism during that time was around preventative education. So how do we use educational tools in order to shift the way that people think about these issues? So that's been my background over the last few years. And I'm a very keen gardener at the moment. So that's my thing at the moment, of like just trying to build some habits of connecting myself to the land and growing things for myself and utilizing the great weather that we've been having, which is amazing because Manchester's always raining. So so that's been my new thing at the moment, is just being in my garden more, trying to just disconnect a little bit from so much of the noise and trying to connect a bit more with myself and what's around me.
Amazing. Yeah, I think it's key, isn't it? Hands in the earth at this time, as much as we can for the sake of sanity. No wonder you find it so difficult to introduce yourself. You're a busy lady. Sounds like you've been up to a lot over the years, and a lot of really, by the sounds of it, really incredible, impactful things. Really looking forward to getting into all of that. And I just wanted to ask about your background and your childhood, that you talked about it a little bit in the film, and I really connected with the way that you spoke about sitting in the library and reading and digesting absolutely everything that you could. But I wanted to ask you this question of, as a child, there was this theme in the documentary about fitting in. How was your experience around that as a child?
It was really bizarre for me because although I was born in the UK, my mum's an English woman who converted to Islam, but we didn't actually live in the UK when I was born. So we were living in Libya, which is my dad's home country. And so I was literally born in the UK and then went back to Libya like literally a month after my mum had me. And so for 8 years of my life, I actually lived in Libya. So all of my early childhood was in Libya. And I loved it. I loved it as a child. It was a very liberating country to be in as a child, which was led by a dictator. So I'm not going to promote that, but being a child in that country was a very different experience to being an adult in Libya. And my dad had a good job. He was working for a oil company at the time. We lived in a kind of a closed community in Libya. The dads in the area would take us down to the beach after school during the summer. The mums would all be connected and take us out to the local park, etc. It was a really freeing space to grow up in as a child. And then we left Libya when I was 8 and came to the UK. And that experience was really difficult. Suddenly everything was closed off. The things that I could do in Libya quite safely, I just couldn't do as a child in the UK in the same way. We experienced a lot of racism and Islamophobia when we first moved to the UK. And I speak a little bit about some of those experiences in the documentary, because some of it really surprised me as to how people behaved towards us, even people who we had invited into our home, who'd spent time with us, who knew us really well, how quickly they shifted the moment that the narrative became very anti-Muslim or very anti-Arab, particularly during the Gulf War era kind of period in the 90s. And so for me, fitting in was really difficult. I just didn't know what to do to be able to fit into the spaces that I was in. And so reading in the library became the thing that I did, which was just, part of it was just to be separate, but also to be in these worlds that were created by other people in these books and stories and so on. And also because I wanted to learn English, to improve my English, to be able to communicate better, etc. So even though I spoke a little bit of English just because of my mum, we never really practiced it. So that was a big thing for me, was just building my language skills, but also just being able to connect to something, because I couldn't see it in the spaces that I was in. School was really difficult, particularly primary school was really difficult. High school less so, surprisingly, but connecting, I think, took me a long time to do. And I think now I don't even think about it in that way. I don't think about myself as needing to necessarily connect to the spaces that I'm in. I think I'm pretty comfortable with knowing that actually what I come with is very different. My experience is different. My background is different. And that's okay. The belonging thing is shifted for me, I think, over the years as I've gone into adulthood. And I don't see it in the same way that perhaps I used to as a child.
So would you say that you see it now, when you say that it's changed from childhood to adulthood, what do you think that change is in terms of how you see it now?
I think for now, I just think that all of us, there's no question of belonging. I just think that all of us belong. Whatever we end up being is where we are meant to be. And so if I'm here and I'm doing the things that I'm doing, it's because God put me in this place to be able to do those things. So to me, anyone who's in any position or in any space that I'm at, that's where they're meant to be. And that's where I'm meant to be. And to me, belonging it's a very different feeling that I needed to fit in. Whereas now I don't feel like I need to fit in. I just know that I do belong, regardless of what anyone else thinks about me. So I think that's maybe the kind of, and some of it is very religiously based. In Islam, there's a lot of talk around the fact that, that you're always in the right spaces because God put you there, essentially. That God gave you the skills and the knowledge and the opportunities to do the things that you are doing. And so it's all written. It's all written for me. All of the things that have happened in my life so far have all been things that have written for me by God. And so they were all meant to happen. And whatever comes next is all meant for me. And what wasn't meant for me will never happen. I will never experience, because it's not for me. It's not my journey. It's somebody else's journey. And not to say that it's not always easy to remember that actually we all belong where we are. But I think for me, that's where things have moved to.
Yeah, I hear that massively. And a question comes up for me there. Do you feel like, having gone through that process yourself, do you feel like that has shifted the way that you perhaps act towards other people? In that sense, if you have this perception of kind of everybody belonging, how do you feel like that has maybe impacted the way that you relate to other people?
That's a really good question. I think part of it is that you're just more accepting of the people that are around you, even the ones that you sometimes think, what the hell are they doing, and why do they have this position, or why are they behaving in the way that they're behaving, and so on. And you think, actually, maybe this is all part of a lesson or a message, or that they are supposed to teach me something, or I'm supposed to teach them something, or that there's some reason or some purpose. So I think that's the thing that I always think with the way that I engage and interact with other people, is that there's a purpose. I've met you. There's a reason why we've connected. And whether that's short-lived is just literally what I might take from this conversation, or what you might take from this conversation, and then that's it. Or whether there's more of a bigger thread about what this conversation might do later down the line for you or for me or whatever. So I do think that I see things as much more connected, and that people that I engage with, that there's a purpose to all of it. There's a purpose to some of this chaos. There's a purpose to who I meet, who I don't meet, and how we engage with each other. And that's, I guess that's a different way. I've never really thought about actually the impact that we have on other people in quite that way. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
No, it just came into my head, and everything that you've shared is just a really beautiful way of being in the world together. This feeling of acceptance, this kind of radical sense of acceptance for everybody, this sense of all belonging. And I love what you were saying there, of there being some kind of purpose in our interactions, even fleeting. I remember when I did an episode last year, and she was saying we come away from every situation, every interaction changed in some kind of way, even minutely in subtle ways. And I love the kind of reinforcement of that every conversation, every interaction, even if it is challenging, can in some way inform what happens next within the general purpose of our lives. So I love you bringing attention to that.
Before we go on, I'd so appreciate you to hit follow or subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, click those 3 little dots next to settings to rate the show. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review, or take a moment to explore how you can rate or review on the platform that you're listening or watching. This makes a difference. I truly believe we need to have more of these conversations to shake up the status quo. We'll beat the algorithm together with your clicks and shares. Now back to the episode.
Something that I loved you speaking about in the documentary, which you just mentioned at the beginning again, was the Three Hijabis. Can you speak to people about how that came about? Because I know that came about through you were watching a football game, and then it became a thing. So can you speak about how that started?
Yeah, it's a weird one. It always, whenever I talk about the Three Hijabis and how it started, I always think, gosh, and this is the thing about that. Sometimes it's just the right time, the right place, and things kick off, literally, no pun intended. But essentially, we were just friends that met up for dinner during the COVID pandemic, when things started to open up and you could actually see people. And it just happened that the day that we met, I'd gone down to London to meet Shyster and Huda, and it was the quarterfinals of the men's Euros then, and the game was Ukraine against England, and we watched the game and we had dinner and all of that kind of stuff at the hotel bar that I was staying in, because it was quiet, essentially. There was nowhere else that you could watch it that wasn't already heaving. And Shyster took a photo of us and did a blurb on her Twitter about the importance of Gareth Southgate's leadership, particularly around the taking of the knee, which at the time, and I don't know whether many people remember, but at the time they were being booed, like literally at the beginning of every game for taking the knee. And there was this whole conversation about inclusivity and the way that the team was showing up in a very different way to how previously perhaps England team has shown up on these particular issues. And also how it shifted for people of colour in this country to associate themselves with the England team, because often a lot of our communities will often support another team as opposed to the England team, partly because there's just the connection with the flag, for instance, is often deemed as very nationalistic and racist. And so there was all these connotations of issues that were at play, but some of that had started to shift during that period. And so anyway, that was the tweet that Shyster put out. She's a journalist, so words are her forte. And the image of us, the three of us with our Diet Cokes at the time and various other things, went viral on social media. It gobsmacked me that people were really surprised that three visibly Muslim women essentially could enjoy a game and could formulate some sense of why it was important at the time. And then the Guardian asked her to write a piece, so she did, and that went viral. So this image of the three of us just became known, and suddenly we were being asked to speak on the game. Oh, come and speak about what your thoughts are on the semi-final, and who do you think is going to win the finals, and what is your score predictions? And I was like, what the hell? But then obviously the final game happened, and England lost 3-0 penalties, and the three players that had missed those goals were three young black players. And I remember sitting there with Huda and Shyster, because we met actually at Huda's house in Wembley to watch the game together. And after that final whistle, we just sat there and just took a deep breath. And I remember saying, this is going to turn into an absolute hellhole for people of colour in this country. Yeah. Because that's the thing that we always understand very well, is that when you're successful, everything is great. But the moment that you fail, then everything becomes about you being a black man or a Muslim woman or whatever. And so your race then starts to become the predominant issue, as opposed to actually England has not got anywhere near a final in years in any competition. So the fact that they even got there, we should have been just proud of. But just to then blame these young men, who some of them were about the same age as my kids at the time, like 19, 20. Come on. These are kids like standing up for the country, essentially, at a time when people needed it. Because during COVID, morale was so low across the country. So many people were grieving. There was so much that we lost during that time period that this was suddenly it was shifting. Like actually supporting the England team, seeing them doing so well, etc., shifted how the hope, I guess, as a country that we had. And then to treat those players in that way just was absolutely disgusting. So that's where then we created this petition, and that we just put it out, essentially, a petition to ban racists from football, and calling for the government to look at the extending of the banning orders to prevent some of this stuff happening in stadiums, but also for social media companies to really address the issue of racism, particularly the targeting of the players through social media, Twitter, which unfortunately, pre-Elon Musk, we had some hope. Obviously, that hope went down the drain after that. But so that was the ask. And that went viral. That went in 48 hours. We had over 1 million signatures. And at the time, we were in the morning of putting it out there and then going off to get breakfast. We were like, if we get 5,000, great. At least it sends a message. We've done something and it feels like there's some hope there. And yeah, it just went insane. And that just led to a whole load of media attention and lots of, over 2 months, I think we were on every national, international, local newspaper, TV station talking about the petition, but also more importantly, talking about the issue of racism in this country and how football is essentially just a microcosm of wider society, essentially, and the issues that are in wider society that we need to tackle.
I found it so interesting to reflect on this common theme that Asma and you had here, in that Asma had a similar experience of a viral video where she intervened on the tube where there was a man who was abusing a Jewish man and his child, and Asma stepped in and calmed him down, and that went viral. And a question that I asked her was, there's so many people in society that wouldn't have stepped in. There's so many people that have this kind of bystander effect. And I found it interesting, the similarity with you, where in the morning, how many people woke up in Britain after that football game and thought, oh, the racism abuse that is coming out is so bad, someone should do something. For the three of you, you did something. And I found that interesting to think about, that is that an innate thing for you? In that, so there was something that Asma said, which, and also something that was in the documentary that the number of you said, which was, as Muslim women, it's in our nature, it's in our culture, it's in the religion to step in when you see something wrong, when you see an injustice, and that really being part of the way that you interact with life. I was just wondering about that, because so many people didn't create a petition that got 1 million people involved.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of similarities between, I think, what Asma probably mentioned, which is a sense of responsibility. But also, I think there's, and I spoke about this earlier, which is about sometimes you're placed in a position where you can do more. And that's the thing that I think the three of us, like I mentioned, we had a lot of media attention already to talk about the game, to talk about the team and so on. And so when the petition went in that morning, I had, for instance, a media interview with BBC Manchester, for instance. And so I used that even before we got the petition out and stuff. It was literally, I used that just to share my reflections of the frustrations and anger and disappointment of what happened the night before and the impact that had on many of us across the country about racism and so on. And so we already had a bit of a platform. And I think if that wasn't there at all, I think we might have done something slightly different. But I think the fact that we had a platform, and so the responsibility to do something with that platform was even more important. And the three of us come from all of us come from change-making spaces. So we're all very familiar with kind of, if you want to create change, then there's different mechanisms or tools or whatever that you can use in order to create that change. And some of that change is sometimes quiet in terms of background, what you do in the background, how you build relationships and how you influence behind the scenes. And some of that is very much in your face, kind of your petitions, your protests, your much more direct action. And for us, it was just finding the right thing to do, like that we thought might work. And so there was conversations about an open letter, and there was conversations about various other things that for us to be able to do and utilize and put out to the media, and utilize the media as the means to get this message across because they were already interested in speaking to us. Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to, as Muslims particularly, I think it's understanding your privilege, understanding your responsibility to humanity, to other people. And if you're given opportunities to do more, then you do more. And that's the reality, is that's on you because God put you there. So if God put you there and you've got all of this attention and you've got all of this ability, then why wouldn't you use it? And if you don't use it, it's almost, I don't know, it's like a betrayal to you and the people that you could be helping or supporting or being a voice for. Because I think the thing that we saw very quickly was that people were also looking for something positive to do. And so signing the petition was the positive thing to do and to share it and to tell other people about it. And we had teachers, for instance, contacting us saying, thank you so much for doing this, because now I can go into school and say to my kids that this is not okay and that there are people doing something about it and that this is one way that we can support them. And there was... sometimes people, at different points, people will be the instigators for change, and at different points you will be the person who's supporting them through that change. And it just happened that we were the instigators of that change or that conversation, and lots of other people, 1 million plus people, were those kind of agents that helped us to build that platform even more. Because if nobody signed it, we would have never had the same leverage to be able to talk about it. And so everyone's role is different. It's just whether at what point are you the one doing the change or are you the supporter of that change? And both are equally as important, because one cannot do what it does without that support.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how that links back to what you were speaking to earlier about being put in the right place. And almost like if that original photo hadn't been put on Twitter and hadn't used the words that she had and it hadn't gone viral and all that, the three of you might not have had that kind of media placement in order to do that petition at the time. So I love that is like an example of that framework, or the way that you see the world like working in real time. So yeah, I love that. How did that expand into the educational activist work that you mentioned at the beginning?
So essentially, we thought that this was, okay, let's get through the petition. And once a kind of the media interest is waned, we can all go back to doing the things that we were doing before, of which we were already. We all have our own pieces of work and organizations that we were working for, etc. But it became very evident that lots of people were really interested in how we said things and the framing of them and also what we stood for. And so people were really fascinated by that. There was also lots of Muslim women who were contacting us about going to their first football match that they'd supported Arsenal for God knows how many years, but had never felt safe to go to the pitch, for instance, to watch an actual game. And so this joy started to appear of all of these different individuals who saw us as a mechanism to actually push against some of the way that they maybe believed what was safe, what wasn't safe, and what they could do or couldn't do, and the spaces that they could access or couldn't access. And also the number of schools that would get in touch with us to speak to their young people about the petition and what we did and why we did it. And we were put on the curriculum in some London schools and Birmingham schools. And I was like, wow, okay, it suddenly became something else that was beyond just having a petition and getting people to sign it and trying to push the FA and the government to actually do something. And at the time, Boris Johnson actually spoke about our petition at PMQs, and we had numerous meetings with the FA. And so all of that work was happening behind the scenes, but it started to extend. So then people started to see us as being in this space that we hadn't really expected to be in this kind of sporting cultural space. And I guess it goes back to everything that I've been saying, is sometimes you're just given opportunities or spaces or things that I'd never thought that I'd be in this space ever before. But it's just another tool, I guess, to do work around equalities, around issues that we're really passionate about. All of us very much interested in kind of the intersections between faith, gender and race, for instance, because of our own experience. And so that was how we started to pull together what is it that we want to do. And some of that we're still figuring out. So some of that is sat in the sporting space. So we've had another petition, for instance, not long after, which was in coalition with two women's rights groups around violence against women and girls in football. Wow. And that led to quite a breakthrough for us in terms of a win. One of the things that we asked for was around preventative education to be extended beyond just the academies, but to all of the Premier League clubs in terms of their staffing and their first team. And so that was done. That was a big win for us in the summer of 22, 23, something like that. So we've done other campaigns. Some of them have not been as big. So that was an open letter, for instance. And this is about what tools do you use at what point? And there was leverage of kind of media interest around, unfortunately, very high profile footballers who were accused of really horrific sexual violence, domestic violence towards partners and ex-partners. And so we were wanting to use those moments where the conversations were on these subjects to try and shift and create some change in those institutions, which kind of worked. Some of it worked. Some of it is slow work, as with any activism or campaigning. A lot of it is very slow work. Some things don't change initially, but it's just about how you continue to put the pressure on. And we did another smaller campaign around gendered Islamophobia during the Paris Olympics, because French visibly Muslim women, weren't able to compete, and yet other women, Muslim women from other countries, could come to Paris for the Olympics and compete with their hijabs on, but French women couldn't because of state legislation that essentially prevented visibility of Muslim women in those spaces. So there's been bits and pieces of work that we have done that is still continued to campaigning, but then we also started to create spaces of safety for Muslim women. So we created the Rahma space. So Rahma means mercy in Arabic. And that really began after the Gaza genocide happened, of creating spaces for Muslim women to actually come and connect and talk about what was happening and the impact that it was having on their lives and in their organizations, particularly around the silencing of voices talking about Gaza. And then obviously the race riots happened. And so the need for those spaces became even more urgent. And from that, we created a program called the Shifa Circle. And Shifa means healing in Arabic. And it's a space for Muslim women changemakers to essentially build connections and really heal from some of the damaging narratives around our lives, around our faith and who we are, and so on. And so there's been lots of things, and then we've developed training around Islamophobia and gendered Islamophobia and intersections of race, etc. We're still developing what it is, what the offer is, essentially. But there's a lot that's happened in those 3.5, 4 years since that initial petition took place.
Yeah, my God, sounds like you've been a busy lady.
Yeah, it's a very collective effort, thank God. Otherwise, I think, I don't think one of us could have tried to pull it off in the same way, because we try and share out the load, particularly where there's media interest. God, I don't think one of the things that I refuse to do is like certain news broadcasters. I'm like, no, thank you. I just don't need the headache. I'm not here to be batting back and forth with somebody. Everyone has got a role, and we all kind of pitch in, and some of us will take on certain media stuff and some others don't, and so on. So it's very much a collective effort, thank God.
Just on that with the media, something that I've heard you say, and I guess also bringing in the race riots and stuff too, you mentioned about how hate breeds hate and spreads through these systems. And I guess within that is the role of the media and these narratives that are intentionally, or also within our language, within journalists' choice of words, things like that. There is so much that these narratives breeds hate. Can you speak to that, about hate breeding hate?
Yeah, to me, I just think there is so much hate around these days. Like, so much of our media coverage, the way that we talk about people who are different from us, is just so focused on hatred of others. And to me, it's just there's nothing good comes from people hating other people. And I think part of why I was talking about hate breeding hate in the documentary was the connection of some of the people that I grew up with, who'd spent a lot of time in our home, for instance, who, because of the influence of the British National Party in the area that I lived in back when I was 15, 16, their whole attitude towards us changed. And so suddenly I saw these young men predominantly who we'd walk to school with, who we ate with, who we watched movies with, who we spent a lot of our social time with, suddenly see us as an enemy, suddenly see us as figures of hate or people to be hated. And how that then bred more hate, because suddenly you're like, you see those people differently, because unfortunately when those people are they're threatening your life or spitting at you when you're walking down the street or attacking your home or whatever, which is all things that they were doing at the time, literally rocks on our home every single night. They would just sit outside and constantly having to contact the police to come and disperse them, and never being able to feel safe going out of your home because they'd be following you, or because they all lived in the same estate. We all lived in the same estate. And it's really hard to care about people who are doing that to you. And that breeding of hate just seemed to just generate more hate. And to me, it's a difficult cycle to get out of. And I feel like in the media at the moment, and particularly around some of the issues with conversations that we've been having on our media spaces, particularly because of some of the volatile political figures that we have, because none of this is coming from necessarily the media directly itself. These are things that politicians are saying or doing or trying to put at the forefront that are then making the headlines. And I just think there's just so much of it is just geared around people being really mistrustful of other people, seeing other people as being a problem, as being hate figures. And to me, it's a really problematic space for us to be in. Nothing good comes from that. And I see it in, like, we were contacted because of the Reform MP who started speaking about the burqa bans and so on. It's like, really? Like, your first time speaking in government in Westminster, you decided to focus it in on women wearing the burqa? Are women, visibly Muslim women, really the biggest threat, biggest problem in this country? We have a hell of a lot of issues in this country to deal with, not least the cost of living crisis, the way in which this country has gone downhill on so much when it comes to our equalities, to come to the standard of living that people are expecting, cuts on everything that we are experiencing at local government level. And you think that's the issue? And for us, we were like, don't want to talk to the media about this, because we're not amplifying reform messaging that is steeped in so much hate and just to me, I don't want to amplify more of the negative stuff that's happening and people are trying to dish out unnecessarily. So I think we need to be much more aware of what it is that we are saying, of what it is that we are doing, of what it is that we're amplifying, and where it is fueled by a hate for other people unnecessarily. It's just stepping away from that, because I don't think people recognize just how much of an impact it has. Like that particular conversation means that I'm going to have to be worried when I'm in public transport, for instance, about how people are then going to react to me. We see the links between what political leaders and what the media starts to focus in on, the impact then that has on people being attacked, or rising levels of Islamophobia or racism or whatever, because of what's in the media. There has to be a level of caution around how we, and the kinds of stories that we tell and how we tell them, because that just seems to have gone out of the window, because now it's just clickbait is what is going to get us the most clicks. And if we can attract them with a really crappy headline, even though the story's got nothing to do with that, then that's what we'll do. And yeah, I find it really difficult to see how much journalism has dwindled into something that is not real journalism, not the way that I see it anyway.
Totally. I hear you deeply on that. And also so much of our political rhetoric and what comes out of individual people's mouths, but actually collectively as well. There is so much there that is harmful, that is very toxic, that is very destructive, hate-inducing, as you spoke to. And I'm curious to ask you, you're somebody that is in the political landscape, and you were the first visibly Muslim woman to ever represent Manchester City Council. I'd love to ask you, what, with the political landscape being as harmful, toxic as it is in many ways, what was your intention for going into politics?
Again, it's one of those things that I didn't expect to go into. I actually was asked to join, at the time, the Labour Party at a big event that was actually on Islamophobia. And I remember disagreeing with the deputy leader of the council at the time, because I thought that he was talking absolute garbage. And I told him in much more diplomatic and nicer terms than that. I disagreed with him very publicly. And he came up to me afterwards, and I was like, oh, crap, it's going to be so annoyed at the fact that I dismissed what he was saying and so on. But actually, he came up to me and he goes to me, are you politically engaged? Would you consider becoming involved? We need more people who are willing to say what needs to be said. And I was like, oh, that's refreshing. And so after meeting him a couple of times, turned out he was actually my local councillor, and I had no engagement in local politics whatsoever. And he guided me through the process. So I joined and started to engage in the party politics at the time. And I never expected to join a political party. My dad was always very anti-political parties. He felt like they were very divisive, and to him it was like, if you want to engage politically, but don't sit yourself in any political party. And how aligning with a political party was always a bit of and partly because of his own upbringing and not having that same political structure, because he lived under a dictatorship pretty much all of his life. It was a very odd experience, to be honest, because I was the only visibly Muslim woman at the time actually in the Labour Party in my local area, and so I never saw anyone who looked like me. And so I always found it a little bit odd, and the people that were really my biggest supporters was an old white man. so he was the one that was giving me the information and really backing me and supporting me and taking me to places and meeting people and just shadowing him in many ways as he was doing his local business. And I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot about how to be a local councillor and how you engage with people and how to work the system in many ways to get the things that you need for the people that you're trying to support. And it was just through that, there's a whole system around how you get selected as the candidate. That was hard. That was hard work, because I was never ever seen to be the likely candidate to be picked. There was always somebody else who was friends with. I think a lot of the party culture, unfortunately, was revolved around who you went out drinking with. So who your buddies were. And I don't socialize in those spaces. I refuse to be in those kinds of spaces. And so I was never best friends or buddies with people who, I guess, had control over how people then ended up getting selected. And and so on. But I did in 2019, and I became the candidate for the Labour Party back then and got elected. I represent the ward that I live in and have lived in for over 20 odd years, and absolutely love the work that I do and the people that I am able to represent day to day. And it's been an amazing experience to do and be able to do the things that I'm able to do in this position. It has a lot of power within that position, but a lot of that power comes from the people that you represent. It's not necessarily the power that you hold. It's what people actually need and want from you. So yeah, it's had its ups and downs massively. There were points in my journey that I thought, I'm never going to get selected. There is a lot of discomfort around the visibly Muslim women, particularly, but there's a lot of discomfort around any woman who holds an opinion that's different from the status quo as well. So it's almost any time I used to ask a question, everyone used to be like, oh my God, why is she asking that question? And it's like, why is she challenging that person or whatever? I'm like, it's not about challenging them. It's just about trying to understand what the hell's going on half the time. And it's like, they took everything as a challenge. They took everything as a problem. They took me as a problem because I was asking those questions. I didn't follow a particular group, which if you're in a political party, if you are not part of a clique, then you're pretty much screwed in many ways. And for me, I was just like, I don't agree with everything either any side says or does. And so I want to be true to who I am. And that's, if I agree with you, I'll support you. And if I don't agree with you, I won't support you. That's the reality. I'm not going to agree with you just for the sake of the fact that we're all connected somehow. Yeah, it's been a journey. It's been a journey, and I got re-elected in 2023 and then resigned from the Labour Party in October 2023 over their position on Gaza. And that's been a particularly difficult time, I think, to have dedicated over a decade of my life to the party and seeing it as the kind of the means to bring some clarity and some stability to this country, and then seeing it as actually just another problematic part of the political space, as opposed to the thing that was going to support this country or support the people in this country particularly. And so for me, that's been the biggest thing, was actually the leaving that political space and going independent. And yeah, what my political trajectory now looks like, I don't know. For me, I don't see myself continuing beyond my term, which ends in 2027. And that's just a conscious decision based on so much that has happened over the last 18 months with the genocide in Gaza and everything that's happening since, and just really thinking about actually what my space is and whether that is sitting in the political space or whether that is doing something different in order to highlight some of the atrocities and injustices that we've been witnessing and some of the double standards and hypocrisy that we have witnessed and still witnessing now with everything that's going on. I think I'm in a reflective stage of my political career of thinking about what's next and where would I best be sitting in order to create the change that I want to see in the world.
Yeah, and it must have been quite a big process, I guess, for you in a number of different ways, that decision to leave the Labour Party over the Labour government's position on or in action in regards to Gaza. I hear within that, I guess, this process of coming to terms with the fact that the organisation that you have aligned yourself with is perhaps not in many ways the organisation that you expected it to be. I imagine that must have been a bit of a process in itself. So I'd love to ask you about what that was like for you, but also what the process was like for you personally in just like a physical reality of how that was for you, leaving the party and becoming independent.
Gosh, it was very emotional. I cannot tell you how much I cried, like for weeks. I think even now it brings me and gets me really emotional. But I think it was the thing that really upset me was actually how I had so much trust in the party that I thought that this was a party of real justice, that they would stand on the right side of history, that they would be the ones that, would have a balanced line around these big, difficult issues that would come up. And I was just so disappointed, disappointed. And I think it was when I resigned, it was a couple of weeks after the national conference. And I love national conference. It's a space that I go to every year. I meet so many incredible people and have done. Like, the Labour Party has been the space where I have so many of my contacts, and so many of the brilliant women, particularly, that I've met over the years have come from my time within the party. And then leaving the conference and then hearing what Keir Starmer said at the time around the fact that Israel had the right to stop water and electricity aid going into the Strip. And I was just thinking, you're a human rights lawyer. Like, how the hell did you get to this point? Like, where you could literally be saying this stuff and not think that this is not okay. And so to me, and then I spent some time talking to people inside the party, and everyone was scared. Everyone was scared to say anything. And I just thought, do I want to be in a political party where I can't express the things that I want to express, even internally, not even talking to anyone outside of the party, just literally with colleagues and people that I trusted and so on. I can't even talk to them about what I was thinking, what I was feeling, how disappointed I was in the position of the government. They weren't government at the time, the opposition at the time, and how this wasn't okay. This has to be challenged, that Keir Starmer, as the leader of the party, can't be saying these things. I'm not willing to sit back and just accept that it's just what the party does, and that somehow I'm part of that party, and so then I'm okay with it. If I'm sitting in the party, then I'm okay with it. And they were just terrified. No one wanted to speak, and they were telling me that I should just be quiet and let it ride out, and that when Labour would get into government, that things would change and things would shift. And I just couldn't buy into it. To me, everything that was taking place at the time was a real reminder of actually how our bodies as Arabs, as Muslims, are deemed less worthy than others. And so the mass killing of children at the time, I think, was like 3,000 kids were killed by November. And it's insane to me. And now we casually talk about 20,000 children being killed in Gaza. And to me, I just couldn't consolidate remaining in the party that was silencing me internally and publicly was saying things that I wholeheartedly disagreed with and went against every single value that I held, and the reasons why I went into politics in the first place. And so it was an emotional roller coaster for a long time. And to me, I was very conscious of the fact that I didn't want it to be. It was about Gaza. It was about what was happening to Palestinian lives. It was about the position that the party was taking at the time. It had nothing to do with individuals. It had nothing to do with the people that my colleagues, for instance, in my ward, or the people that are in Manchester City Council, that this was a very personal decision at my disappointment at what I was seeing at a national level. And for a while that seemed to be okay, but the party dynamics are always really interesting, because once you become opposition, supposedly, people then stop talking to you, the relationships shift, people are very wary of connecting with you, people that I really trusted in the party no longer would speak to me. And so it just became this very weird, toxic environment. And now there's nothing I regret about any of the decisions that I've made. I think if you stand true to who you are, I think as difficult a decision as it was, it's never going to be the wrong decision if you know yourself, if you know your values, if you know that what you're doing is the right thing. And for me, it was the right thing, not only for me, but also just to amplify the cause. And that for me is the most important thing, that this is about Palestine. It's about the right for Palestinians to exist, for Palestine to exist. And that should be the primary, I guess for me, that was the primary objective of my resignation, was if that amplified the situation, great. And we did a number of media stuff at the time around it and various op-eds. And that's, to me, the most important thing, is what voice do we have in order to make things better for people who don't have a voice.
And that's what I really hear in your decision, this deep knowledge and truth of who you are, what you stand for, what you do, what you will not stand for as well. And there must just be so many
people within the Labour Party. I don't know if you've come across them, that there must be so many people who who are silencing themselves, who are not going against the grain, who are not speaking out, who are conforming, remaining complicit within what is happening. Then surely there must be so many people who are doing that.
I hate speaking for other people. I know that there's lots of people who obviously disagree with the positions nationally. And it's not like in the 10 years that I was in the Labour Party that everything that at a national level one of the leaders said or did, I agreed with. But I guess it's where it hits a red flag or a kind of a boundary that you're not willing to push against. And for me, that's what it was. That was and I remember the colleague that I mentioned to you that got me involved in the Labour Party in the first place. I remember meeting him because I knew he would be not angry, but upset at me leaving, because I think his ambitions for me were much higher than actually what the Labour Party was probably going to be able to afford me, because he thought that I would make it much, much higher and keep going politically. And part of that is because he's a white man who's been able to maneuver in these political circles really easily, and it's really difficult to get him to understand that that's not my experience, that everything that's happened so far has been a real challenge. And partly that is because I'm a visibly Muslim woman and people are deeply uncomfortable by my visibility as a Muslim woman. And I think sometimes he didn't quite grasp what that meant and what that felt like and how that was practically on the ground. But I remember, and one of the things he said to me was that he'd remembered a conversation that we had before I joined the Labour Party, where we talked about Palestine, and I remember saying to him that to me that was one of the greatest causes, I guess, that were really important to me. And if the party kind of did anything that was in contradiction to the right for Palestinians to exist in any way, then for me that would be a real boundary that I couldn't cross. And he reminded me of it, and I was like, wow, okay, that was a long time ago. But I remember saying that. But it's, yeah, I guess a lot of people will sit in lots of spaces where they are silenced, and everyone's got their own journey, and I'm not going to make any judgment around anyone who's decided to remain in the party or leave or whatever, because it's their own journey. And for me, it was the right thing to do.
And how is it for you now operating as an independent?
Oh, so much quieter. Honestly, it's so much nicer to be able to do things independently. Some of it comes with lots of challenges because I'm having to deal with 2 other Labour colleagues who are in my ward, both of whom I have really good relationships with. I've got no issues with, etc. But I think they're very conscious of the fact that I'm independent and that they shouldn't be seen to be engaging with me too much and so on. But otherwise, to me, it's just the same as before, just without all the headaches of internal party politics, essentially. I don't have to think about any of the internal stuff that happens. I don't have to attend any of the internal meetings, of which there were a lot. A lot of my evenings are back in use. My weekends aren't spent campaigning for the party. I've got a lot of my time back. I'm able to do things in a slightly different way. But I don't think much has changed for me in the way that I operate necessarily. I have to be much more creative, because where I used to go to people within the party who held positions of power, I now have to look at other ways of influencing that power to create the change in my communities. But most of the time, they're relatively decent to me in terms of issues that I raise and concerns from my residents, etc. Partly generally people are decent. They want to help you because you're helping somebody else. There's nothing that I'm doing that is about me necessarily. It's oftentimes it's casework issues that relate to my community and to individuals in my community. But yeah, very peaceful. That's all I can say. It's been much quieter than being in a political party, which is something I never thought that you don't think about when you're in it, I guess.
Yeah.
All of the noise and all of the things that you're constantly having to navigate in the internal party politics. And when you leave it, there's like this whole silence of not having to engage with any of it. And it's absolutely beautiful to not have to concern myself with anything that's going on internally.
I can imagine. And I just wanted to ask you one more thing, which was something that you mentioned in the documentary. when you became the representative in Manchester City Council, you mentioned that a man came over to you and asked you to take a picture with his two daughters to show his daughters all the things that they could do that they might be told that they can't do. I was just wondering how that lands for you now, the message, I suppose, that you aim to through being the person that you are in the rooms that you are in, how you aim to convey that to other people, to other women, to, I know that you've got two grown-up kids, or two teenage kids, is that right?
Yeah. They're young adults now.
Young adults. Yeah. What do you feel like you being in the rooms that you're in, you try to convey to people in that way?
Oh, it depends on the space that I'm in. I get invited a lot to speak to schools, to universities, etc. And a lot of that is around the representation element of being a visibly Muslim woman who's in those political spaces and in public spaces in general, because it's not just in politics. The Three Hijabis have had considerably way more media than anything I've ever done at a local political level. And oftentimes that's just to encourage, I guess, and give confidence to those young Muslim women who are just in the start of their careers or growing up in a society that often deems them as sometimes as a problem, as if there's something wrong with our identity. And so sometimes I'm speaking to that, which is a very specific kind of issue around our representation and the things that we stand for, and just showing up as we are, the impact that has on young people, whatever. And so that's one framing. I think in other positions where I'm in meetings where I am the only Muslim person in the room, or the only woman in the room, or whatever that situation happens to be, I'm often trying to ensure that voices of people like me, also not just like me, but people who are often marginalized in my community, making sure that those voices are being heard and addressed. And that's something that I try and do through scrutiny, what we do at full council and what I do in meetings and so on, is making sure that those voices are consistently represented where possible. And I think sometimes just showing up and taking up space is the thing that often shocks people, is that you can come with a level of confidence that you speak with a level of confidence that often people don't assume that you will come with. And that's partly because of really kind of colonial narratives around Muslim women being oppressed and being quiet, and somebody else controlling us, often other men in supposedly in our families, if only. There's all these kind of narratives, which we see still now. If you look at the narratives around what's happening with Israel and Iran, and a lot of the kind of Iranian women are being subjugated by, that's not to say that isn't happening, but it's almost a war or conflict or bombing people is going to liberate women. It's like, we tried that in Afghanistan. But it's those narratives that consistently keep happening. And unfortunately, whether people consciously or subconsciously believe it or not, it's how they come to you or how they portray you or how they relate to you is often with this kind of slight hesitance around who you must be. One of the things we always used to get is, oh my God, you speak so eloquently. Oh, you speak English really well. And it's because we're most of us born and educated or been in this country for a long time. And this kind of real, and to me, it's just because they haven't mixed enough with Muslim women, because most of us are really well educated, articulate, able to talk about the things that we're passionate about, are sitting in spaces where we do a hell of a lot of work, but people just don't engage with us in that way. And if you're not engaging with all of these incredible women that are in our communities, then how would you know that we've got all of these talents, all of these things that are going for us? So I guess it's different depending on where I am and who I'm speaking to and what it is that I'm doing. I have to say that I used to spend quite a lot of time performing. And what I mean by that is that I'm generally quite, and I say this as somebody who's talked quite a lot now for over an hour to you, but as somebody who's quite quiet and reserved, it takes me a while to get warmed up in a situation. I'm really awkward socially in big social settings, really awkward. And I used to have to really perform in those spaces because I've always felt like there was a discomfort that people had towards me when I was in those spaces. And so I was like always having to be really chatty and ask questions and really overdo things that isn't how I behave normally. And I don't do that anymore, because to me, I don't feel like I should have to. If you're uncomfortable, sit with the discomfort. I'm not here to make it better for you. If you're uncomfortable by me being here, then just be uncomfortable, stay uncomfortable. Whereas before, that used to really trigger me, and maybe because I'm a very sensitive person, and so I feel people's energies in a space that I'm in, and so I feel like often I'm having to perform to that, whereas now I don't. And I say that to any woman, really, is let people sit with their discomfort of you being in that space. Let them be amazed at the things that you're coming up with and doing, because you just show up as you, and that's what I do now. I'm not here to represent anyone necessarily. If what I represent is positive to somebody and they can take something good from it, great. But I'm not here as a spokesperson for Muslim women. I'm just one Muslim woman, and there are many other incredible Muslim women out there who can speak for themselves. And to me, there's a whole journey, I think, that I've taken as I've got older, of just being much more comfortable with myself, that I don't feel like I have to be a representative for anyone else, and just try and do whatever good I can in the spaces that I have been very privileged to be in, and utilize them in the best way that I can.
Thank you so much. All of this I've found it really inspiring, just hearing about your story and your journey. Operating within a political space, I have so much respect for. You must be a very patient, tolerant woman. So yeah, just so much respect for everything that you do within the political sphere, but also within your educational activist work. And it sounds, from what we were speaking to at the beginning of the conversation, you've been put in some really interesting places in life.
I'm very fortunate. I think that's the way that I see it, has been very fortunate to have had the experiences that I've had, to have been able to do some of the stuff that I have been able to do. And there will be more. There will be more spaces and more things that hopefully will come in the future. But just do the best you can with the space that you are afforded and given, I guess, is the message.
Thank you so much. Is there anything that you wanted to direct people towards, if they're interested in hearing more about the work that you do? Is there anything that you wanted to direct people to or share?
You can follow the Three Hijabis on LinkedIn. We don't really use Twitter anymore. We have Twitter was the main platform that we got viral from and stuff back in the day, but we don't really use it anymore. But we also have a website, although we're a bit slow with updating it, but there's a lot of information on there as well about us. But LinkedIn is probably the best place to be updated on the work that we engaged in.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Amna. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much for your time and everything that you've shared.
Thank you so much, Megan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show, all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references and contact information is detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback, so feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share or send on to someone else who would benefit. Until next time, big love.